Hi, my name is Chris Porco. I was just called by the Times Union saying that my parents were found dead this afternoon. I was wondering if you had any information on me.
Hey, Chris, whereabouts are you?
I'm at school in Rochester, New York.
Okay, you're in Rochester?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a phone number there, Chris?
Yeah, I sure do.
Okay, and are you in?
Hello. Welcome to another episode of What Were They Thinking? True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Philip Tomaso. And I'm telling you, you just heard an actual 911 call. This was Chris Porter calling 911 to find out more information about learning that both of his parents were found dead. Did he sound distraught? Okay, well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Who murdered Peter Porco? That is Christopher's father. Who murdered him? And as always, it's Monday, April 10th, and this is episode 9 of What Were They Thinking? True Crime Podcast. Hopefully you are enjoying the show so far. Let me tell you what, I was going over a lot of my statistics and everything that gets done for an episode, and I realized I spend roughly 12 hours per episode, 12 hours of doing research, putting together the my thoughts that are going to go into the scripts that are produced, and then, wow, 12 hours per episode. It doesn't matter the length of the episode, it seems to. Anyway, today, who murdered Peter Porco? Hope everyone had a great weekend. Happy Monday. Hopefully this helps ease some of the Monday blues you may be feeling. We'll dive right in here. Delmar, New York is a hamlet in the town of Bethlehem in Albany County. New York Route 443, also more commonly known as Delaware Avenue, cuts right through the middle of the hamlet as a main artery leading directly to Albany, the state's capital, New York State's capital. Christened by CNN in 2005, Delmar in New York was rated as one of the best places to live in America, coming in 22nd on that list, including the ranking considered a great American town. In this hamlet, with roughly 9,000 people, the community was about to find themselves in the middle of a horror movie-like and grisly murder scene, which occurred before sunrise on November 15th in 2004. Which is, I think, then ironic that in 2005. But that's not the point of this episode. Okay, so the sun would rise on the 15th at 6:48 a.m., and while the temperatures would climb as high as 52 degrees by midday, the morning hours were something more of a brisk 32 degrees. Very much expected in November in New York. Joan and Peter Porco lived at 36 Broccoli Drive in Delmar. Their two-story house had a long driveway and a large tree off to the side of the front lawn, and it was a very woodsy residential neighborhood connecting Delaware Avenue to Orchard Street, and surrounded off with homes filled with cul-de-sacs. So all around the neighborhood there was these homes with, or streets leading to cul-de-sacs. So very picturesque, maybe a snapshot of why Delmar was considered one of the best places to live in America. Joan, 54 years old, was a children's speech pathologist, and Peter, 52 years old, worked as a state Supreme Court law clerk. And when he didn't show up for work on the 15th, Peter's boss, Judge Cardona, and his other colleagues grew concerned. He's never late for work, and no one was answering the telephone when they tried reaching him at home. The judge assigned court officer Michael Hart to go to the house and check on him. Now, this may seem a little bit odd. The judge is sending a court officer to go check on why an employee didn't show up for work. I work at 911, and if I fail to show up for a shift and I don't answer my phone, a supervisor will dispatch police officers to my house to make sure everything's okay. It happened once. I got to tell you, it did happen once. Working midnights, I forgot to set my alarm, and I woke to the sound of someone hammering my door with a fist. I knew the minute I opened my eyes, and my eyes spring open, and I knew it's going to be the police out there knocking because I'm obviously late for work. And trust me, it only needs to happen once. Doesn't matter what time of night the police show up at your place. Neighbors notice, then they whisper, then they eye you all funny like when you get the mail for the next week or 2 weeks or so. So it's not an uncommon thing in some professions. Hart knocked on Peter's door, but no one was answering. He noticed the door was unlocked and he decided to venture inside and see if anything was wrong. Inside the house, everything was covered in blood. Our Hart had stepped into a horrific nightmare. Here he figures he's just going to go find his coworker sick in bed or something. But instead, at the top of the stairs was the butchered remains of his friend, Peter Porco. Hart knew his friend was dead, beyond help. So he first called the judge to tell them what he found, and then he contacted the police. Police would later determine that, despite or in spite of severe and catastrophic head trauma, part of Peter's skull had been chopped off from the rest of his head. That Peter left his bedroom, he went downstairs, he began making breakfast, and then he made his way back up the stairs before his body finally succumbed to the fatal injuries. He never noticed the blood that was trailing behind his every step. That part of his brain wasn't aware, but the other part of his brain that was left intact was performing normal daily functions as if nothing was wrong, but he wasn't able to understand what had taken place, which is extremely bizarre. Extremely bizarre. So Detective Chris Bodish responded, and it was not his first time at the Porco residence. In 2002, the Porco's home had been burglarized. Bodish met with Peter and Joan for the report, and the burglary, though was never solved, the detective couldn't help but wonder if this had been a badly botched second burglary attempt. Bodish and a host of other officers started the investigation immediately. And right off, Bodish noticed a loose key was still inside the lock on the front door. The Porcos kept apparently, a spare key hidden in a flower pot in the front. Never understood why people do that. The items inside the house hadn't been tossed. It didn't appear as if someone went through the place looking for valuables. In fact, Joan's purse was in plain view and other obvious valuables were untouched. However, other signs or clues did point in the direction of a burglary. The alarm system had been tampered with, the phone lines had been severed in the backyard, and there was a window screen in the garage that had been cut, and the window was left wide open. Immediately, I start thinking about the key left in the front door, though. In my mind, I'm already suspicious, wondering if the screen and garage window had been staged. I was clearly not alone in my own suspicious feelings. Detective Bodish senses something fishy about the whole setup, and his brain started tossing around the idea of an inside job. Bodish started thinking this crime had been committed by someone who knew the Porcos and knew them well. Joan and Peter have two sons. Jonathan, who is 23 years old at the time, was in the Navy and stationed in South Carolina. Christopher, who was 21 at the time, was a student at the University of Rochester. And you heard his 911 call at the beginning of the episode. It's very common police practice when murder is involved to look at family first. Start at the innermost part of the circle and then work your way outward. We've all seen crime shows, we know that's how they work. So, the heinous crime, let's cover that. As police continued the search of the house, they found yet another grisly scene. Joan Porco, 54 years old, like I said, was still in bed. Blood was everywhere in the bedroom. Next to the bed was a blood covered axe. Turns out the axe used in the murder of Peter Porco and the attack on his wife Joan was from the Porco garage. Officers believed Joan was dead as well, that the two homicides had been committed. Her face was unrecognizable, her skull was smashed open. Officers could see a chunk of brain through the gaping head wound, and there was no way Joan could still be alive after such a vicious attack. But they were wrong. Not only was she not yet dead, she was not unconscious. She was awake. EMTs, emergency medical technicians, got to work straight away. Police called them immediately into the room, and they worked on dressing her wounds as best they could. Because she was conscious, Bodish asked if she might know who had done this to her. Turns out her jaw was broken, so she was unable to talk, and the best Joan could do was nod her head yes or shake her head no to the questions asked. This time, she nodded yes. When Bodish asked if Jonathan had done this to her, Jonathan, who was stationed in South Carolina for his stint in the Navy, Joan shook her head from side to side. Jonathan had not done this. Bodish then asked if Christopher was responsible for the vicious attack. Christopher, this was the 21-year-old U of R student, according to Bodish and the EMTs who were in the room that morning, Joan nodded her head up and down time and again, indicating that Christopher had indeed attacked her and her husband. Joan was then rushed to the hospital. She would endure endless hours of emergency surgery. The fact she was still alive was a miracle. The damage done to her face and skull were severe enough that she was far from out of the woods, though. So technically, whoever was indeed responsible for the brutal attack hacked up Peter and Joan, bashed in their faces and skulls with an axe, and left them for dead, maybe not realizing that, for a time, they were both still alive. When officials contacted Jonathan, he was indeed in South Carolina at the Navy base. And Christopher, who was contacted first by a reporter, was in his dorm at the University of Rochester. This is also some 200 miles away from where his boyhood home in Del Mar was located. After awakening from a medically induced coma, Joan could not remember the attack or the details about the murder of her husband. She also could not remember telling the detective in a room with EMTs as witnesses that she had indicated her son was responsible for the killing. This was too late for Detective Bodish, though. Once Joan indicated Christopher was the one who attacked his parents, he got to work gathering evidence. Christopher had become a prime suspect, the main person of interest. It wouldn't take long to then assemble the scattered clues together like tattered and hacked pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Once everything was in place, what emerged was a crystal clear picture. This is the part of true crime that I love too. It's the police work, the evidence, putting it all together. The rest of this story, though it's horrifically tragic, is true crime junkie satisfying. Stay with me now. Christopher drove home to Del Mar after hearing the news about his parents, stopping in to see his mother at the Albany Medical Center first. He told a reporter that when he saw his mother so bruised and battered that he burst into tears and dropped onto his knees right there beside her. Contradicting that statement was a former youth minister also at the hospital visiting Joan and to be there for Christopher, and he said he was struck by Christopher's odd behavior because he did not exhibit any grief. Police then interviewed Christopher for roughly 6 hours, where he denied playing any part in the attack on his parents. He explained he could not have been in his hometown when he was 200 miles away in Rochester, asleep on the couch in his dorm room all night. That was his alibi. Christopher owned a canary yellow ragtop Jeep, and the police confiscated it so it could be processed by forensic specialists. So while the interview took place, another team of police investigators made their way to the University of Rochester, where they questioned several people in the dorm room. The general consensus was the same. No one saw Christopher sleeping on the couch in the dorm room. One student questioned had even said that a group of them were up until at least 3:30 a.m. and were in the room where the sofa was located. He said, "It's a square room with some couches and a TV. It's not like maybe he was there and we overlooked him. He was not there." That is a damning statement right there. He was not there. On November 20th, Christopher hired an attorney, Terrence Kinlan, who indicated his client felt harassed by police. At the time, police had not charged Christopher yet with any crimes. This was also the same day as Peter Porco's funeral, where hundreds of people attended. Joan, who was still in the hospital recovering, was unable to attend, and they assured her they would hold another service for her before Peter's remains were finally cremated and he was laid to rest. 2 weeks later, Joan provided a videotaped deposition. Police were anxious to hear what she had to say and were then surprised to learn Joan no longer was identifying Christopher as the attacker. Over the next several months, although police did look at other suspects, they also dug for the answers to one burning question: who exactly was Christopher Porco? In 2002, Christopher had graduated from Bethlehem High School and moved to Rochester, New York, and then attended classes at the University of Rochester, where he studied biomedical engineering and economics. He joined a fraternity, Sigma Phi Epsilon, and made the university swim team. Although he made a ton of friends while away at school, Christopher presented himself in a light far different from the truth. He was clearly a deceptive person. Christopher liked to tell people he was rich, that his grandmother was a wealthy landowner. And adding to this, Christopher spent a lot of money to keep up the appearances of someone from money. The big problem was he wasn't rich and was living well beyond the means of a meager college student. This imaginary lifestyle led the biomedical engineering student to turn to crime. Remember, the Porcos had a burglary a few years back? Two of the laptops stolen at the time were sold on eBay, and the transactions led back to Christopher. He also burglarized a veterinarian office where he worked, taking digital cameras, a camcorder, pocket computers, and a cell phone, all of which he also sold on eBay. Those transactions were all traceable. In July 2003, tried and true, Christopher broke into the home of his parents and stole his father's laptop. He sold that on eBay as well. By December 2003, Christopher's grades were hemorrhaging. It's no wonder. Coordinating all of these thefts and then offloading the goods must have taken plenty of his time and energy. And during the first semester of his sophomore year, Christopher was suspended. What he did was he lied to his parents, telling them the suspension was a mistake. He blamed it on a professor for losing his final exam. He told his parents not to worry because of the mistake, the school was going to reimburse his tuition monies. Tuition, let me tell you, let's get into this. Tuition for the U of R is roughly $70,000 a year, or $35,000 a semester. By the end of 4 years at the university, students could owe as much as $280,000 in loans. Not a small chunk of change for anyone by any means. While suspended, Christopher enrolled at a local community college but didn't complete much of the coursework. He then forged the community college transcripts from failing grades to A's and B's and was reaccepted into the U of R on forged documents. Debt from the suspended semester, along with the next semester, was mounting. Christopher needed a plan to overcome the financial burdens he'd created for himself. He convinced his father to agree to a $2,000 loan to cover books and some of the other college essentials. And then he rigged the line of credit in his favor and extracted over $32,000 from his parents without their knowledge. Naturally, when Peter received statements from his bank in November, the gig was up. Peter and Joan knew their son was lying to them and stole from them. Peter actually called the university and he learned there was never a free or reimbursed tuition for the semester Christopher was allegedly accidentally suspended. Worse, or maybe not worse, but in addition to the forged $32,000, Peter learned of a $16,000 car loan in his name and the money Christopher used to buy himself that canary yellow Jeep. Nice Jeep Wrangler. One of my favorites. And still, Peter learned Christopher was behind on the loan payments, which was now negatively impacting Peter and Joan's credit. So he owes money, he's not making any payments, and Peter and Joan are suffering from this financially. On November 15th, Peter wrote his son threatening to file a forgery affidavit against Christopher. Joan was also writing letters to her son, questioning his mental health and asking why he insisted on lying and stealing. So the parents are well aware that their son is making a mess out of his life. All of this information were key puzzle pieces police used to gain the picture Christopher was creating. Motive. That's what this all leads to, is motive. They figured Christopher decided to kill his parents so he could inherit their money, pay off his college debt, and avoid having his father press any charges against him. In December 2004, a grand jury met to decide if there was enough evidence to move forward against Christopher Porco for the murder of his father and the attack against his mother. And Christopher was then named officially the key suspect in this case, in this murder investigation. At this point, poor Joan Porco wrote a letter pleading with the DA to leave Christopher alone. She wrote, and this is a quote from her writings, "I want to say unequivocally that although I have no memory whatsoever of the attack, either because I was asleep or because of my injuries, I am absolutely positive that my son was in no way involved in this heinous crime." I'll be saying this in many episodes. This is what I consider the obligatory parental denial. So, regardless of 600 other leads followed up on by the police, the accumulated evidence against Christopher Porco countered Joan's parental thought process. Okay. So Christopher was looking at 50 years to life in prison if found guilty of the crimes he was now being officially accused of committing. Well, let's go back to the night of the murder and vicious attack of the Porcos just for a moment. So before the Easy Pass, and that's EZ, just the letters, the New York State Thruway had toll booths with toll booth operators who were there to collect the tolls at the on-ramp and exit ramp locations. Interstate 90, or I-90, is 385 miles long. It starts at the Pennsylvania state line in Ripley and ultimately ends at the Massachusetts state line in Canaan. It's a main artery for connecting us Rochester people with Albany, or if we're headed in the opposite direction to Buffalo. It's a great, easy, no traffic lights interstate. So although Christopher had claimed he'd been asleep the night of the attack on a couch in his dorm in Rochester, police worked the theory. They figured he could have easily made the 3-hour trip from Rochester to Albany, brutally attack his parents, and make it back to Rochester before morning. A New York State Thruway toll booth worker recalled a bright yellow Jeep just outside of Rochester at around 10:45 p.m. on the 14th. and another toll booth worker nearer to Albany recalled a yellow Jeep going excessively fast passed through the toll booth area around 2 a.m. the morning of the 15th. 4 security cameras at the University of Rochester have video recordings of a yellow Jeep leaving the campus around 10:30 p.m. on the 14th and returning on campus around 8:30 a.m. on the 15th. One of the Porcos' neighbors testified to seeing a yellow Jeep in the family's driveway on the night of the attack. This is so much evidence. The trial, because now we're at that trial point, the trial for Christopher Porco began on June 27th, 2006. So during this trial, the defense argued police proved zero physical evidence linking Christopher Porco to the crimes he was being accused of committing, not even fingerprints on the axe, which was found at the scene. Defense attorney Kinlan described the Bethlehem police as unfamiliar with a serious crime investigation, describing them as a department that chases skateboarders away from the 7-Eleven. This is not the FBI. That's what he had to say about the police department. Kinlan's co-counsel, Lori Shanks, this is also his wife, Kinlan's wife, she told the jury it was more likely Peter's death was the result of retaliation against his uncle, Frank Porco. Frank had been a captain in the Bonanno crime family, the mafia, the mob. Shanks explained that Frank's nickname with the family, and I have the family capitalized, was the fireman, which in her way of thinking explained the use of an axe. Her reasoning, though, misstated to the jury, was because Frank had been indicted for murder. Frank, the fireman Porco, had not been indicted for murder. He had, however, served 2 years in prison for loan sharking and extortion. Police did look at the mafia connection, but they found none, other than what was just explained. Jonathan, Christopher's brother, also testified at the trial. It's believed his testimony influenced the jury considerably, as Jonathan described his brother as icy and their relationship as strained. On August 10th, 2006, the prosecution and the defense rested and the jury began deliberating. Later that same day, the jury returned with a verdict. Christopher Porco was found guilty of second-degree murder and attempted murder. Christopher stood motionless and he showed no emotions. Judge Jeffrey Berry stated, "I fear very much what happened in the early morning hours of November 15th is something that could happen again." And on December 12th, Christopher was sentenced to 50 years to life on each count and incarcerated at the Clinton Correctional Facility. This is up in northern New York, not too far from Plattsburgh on one side and Montreal on the Canadian side. It's a maximum security prison for men and contains roughly 3,000 prisoners. Anyway, while incarcerated there, Christopher appealed his conviction to both the Appellate Division, 3rd Department, and the New York Court of Appeals, but in 2010, thankfully, both appeals had been denied. In January 2023, just a few months ago, the convicted felon, Christopher Porco, did an interview with ABC News. It was ABC News' John Gray. When Gray asked Porco the obvious question, "Did you do it?" Porco's response, his answer, was what was expected. He said, "I didn't. I had nothing to do with this. I've said that from day one because it's true. I understand why police thought I did it. I don't blame them for arresting me or trying me, but they made mistakes in their case." Porco has a new attorney, and that attorney is in the process of filing something known as a 440 motion. It's a motion to vacate judgment, a way to challenge a conviction. However, the burden is all on the defense and defendant to show by a preponderance of evidence that his or her conviction should be vacated, that it should be overturned. His new attorney has issues with the timeline. She feels it's too tight and near impossible to pull off the driving from the University of Rochester to Del Mar and then back, and hacking up his parents in the meantime. Porco states that through all of this, his mother has remained his biggest advocate. He says about her, she's the toughest person you'll ever meet. We speak every day. She has borne the brunt of this without a doubt. We've gotten through this together, really. We're the support system for each other, but she's endured much more than I ever will. At least he's given his mother props. She probably, or maybe, doesn't realize anything or doesn't want to. Blinders. She's got those blinders on. Gray, the reporter, asked Porco one final question. If you are granted a new trial and the prosecution doesn't want to put everyone through this again, might you consider pleading guilty to the attack if they offered you time served and let you go free? Porco's answer? No. Crazy as it sounds, I'm committed to seeing this through. So Gray's asking him if you could plead guilty at this new trial and time served. That means you don't even have to go back to prison because you've already served enough time and you'll be free. Would you do that? And he says no, because he believes he's innocent, or he wants everyone to believe he is innocent. According to Gray, it could take months for Porco's lawyers to learn if their latest legal maneuver was a success. Christopher Porco is in his 17th year of the 50-year sentence and will first be eligible for parole in 2052. Doesn't mean it'll be granted, but that's when he'll first be eligible. So I'll be keeping an eye on this case and on that motion, that 440 motion, and maybe we'll be doing a second episode, a follow-up episode, to see what happened. This is kind of cool, the cases that I'm covering, because a lot of them are still in motion. Still a lot of things taking place, keeping us true crime junkies biting at the nails. Biting at the nails? Biting the nails. I don't know. Biting at the chomp. I think that's actually the right phrase. I do plan to keep you posted. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we do have some great episodes still coming up in what I'm calling season 1 of What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. Thank you for listening to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. As always, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. New episodes every Monday.